Hi, everyone. This will be a really quick video, but what I want to do is just to give you a little bit of oral feedback, I guess, describing the project that you're going to be working on this week. And I use the term project loosely. It's really just a short journal assignment, no more than hopefully about 2 pages or so double spaced. The assignment is going to connect with the lesson that you did on the second day on ethics and experimentation. And in particular, the first item for homework, which I gave you, which is this sheet right here. This is actually taken verbatim from your textbook. And you can see here it describes a number of different famous, unethical, infamous experiments that have occurred over the years. Some of them happened more recently, like, for example, the David Reimer study. Some of them occurred quite a long time ago, like Little Albert, but they're all kind of notorious in the sense that they're studies where a scientist at some point, a psychologist, thought that they had useful research and data that they were collecting, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the experiment was not successful. And not only was it not successful, but there were huge questions asked in the years following on how those experiments were allowed to go through. And why the risks and ethical violations that occurred ever happened the way they did. What I want you to do for this particular study is as follows. First thing, read through these and pick one or two that you find interesting. And you may want to pick a couple because you may want to do a little bit of light research before you settle on one that you'll do your report on. Once you've chosen your topic and you've settled on one that you have some information for, then you'll start in on the journal. The journal, I've said 2 pages. You can do up to 3 if you want. Try not to go over 3 pages double spaced, though, 2 to 3 in that range. Don't be under 1.5 pages. If you are, you're too short, so you need to be at least about 2. What I want you to do is the following 4 things, and there's 4 questions. You can label them A, B, C, D, or if you want. First thing, tell me about the experiment. Give me some context. That's really just reiterating what you've learned. Don't tell me every detail, but give me a half paragraph or so, half a page paragraph, where you tell me who ran the experiment, why they ran the experiment, or in some cases the study, what the goal was, what was the purpose for the work. The second thing I want you to do is, again, probably reiterating things that you read, but you are going to have to at least synthesize it and make sure that the answer is clearly answering this particular question. I want you to tell me, what are some of the ethical problems that exist? We looked at a list on the lesson I gave you of different ethical challenges that psychologists might have when they run experiments, and red flags and things you shouldn't do. Which of those kinds of violations are going on here, and why are they so controversial from the perspective of outsiders? The third point, and this is where you're going to have to start to think a little bit, because it's not going to be in the direct research that you find. And it's really the last written question, because the last part is just a bibliography. But the third part is, I want you to tell me whether or not the experiment, in your opinion, had any redeeming value and could have been improved. Some of these experiments is going to be hard to do that with. Like, for example, David Reimer, uh, there's some really serious ethical violations that I think by 2020 standards, it's just not really a question at this point. It was thoroughly unethical and a human rights violation, if anything, or not if anything, just a clear human rights violation. Other cases, there may have been ways to study the issues, but maybe not necessarily with that particular study. So a better study, a more careful, more sensitive study that had its sort of variables controlled in a more ideal way, it could have actually worked. So give some thought to that. Think about the root kind of core issues that your scientist is trying to look into, and tell me, do you think there was a possibility that, with some revisions or maybe just major reforms, that issue could have been studied in a way that didn't violate our codes of what's permissible? Similarly, as part of that question, you can also sort of consider, are there parts of the experiment itself that maybe could have been salvaged? Okay, and in some cases, your answer may just be no. There's ways of studying this issue, but this experiment, everything about it is wrong. In other cases, you may actually feel that, you know what, there would have been a way to do this if the following details had been fixed up, and here's how I would go about things. That's a challenging question. Certainly, it's one that you're going to have to think about a little bit. So if you have questions, I would recommend that you take advantage of those office hours if need be. Don't leave it forever, okay? Because obviously you do want to be able to, at least if you're not sure what you're doing, ask those questions. I think you could probably leave the writing till later in the week, but hopefully if there's something about just what you're doing or how you need to interpret things, I would try to get on top of that in the first couple of days. The only other thing I will ask for is that when you submit your project with a short bibliography at the end, and at this point you know how to do those, and please submit it to me in Microsoft Word format or .txt or something that's open, easily opened. Again, as I mentioned before, not .pages. I can't open those Mac files very easily. Final point, quick point. I posted on the first, I guess, video for this week some reflections on research, which was actually more designed towards the ISP because you may be working on that work to get ahead for next week. That's what you're doing next week. But if you want to use the Toronto Library and JSTOR and things like that, that might actually be a good place to look for some of this information. So don't just rely on the first thing that you find through Google. Start to use your tools of research that hopefully you're developing in your little bit more robust I guess selection of sources that those new tools might open the door towards. Hopefully this makes sense. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Good luck.